All right, hey everybody, and welcome to Social and Economic Trends in Emergency Management. I'm your instructor, Professor Ben Lockspeiser, and this video is just kind of an introduction to introduce you to myself, kind of my background a little bit, how I got into emergency management, where I live, a little bit of my background, like I said, and then also what you're going to learn over the next 7 or so weeks in this class. As you all know, this is a grad class. It's going to be pretty intensive for the 7 weeks, but I think you'll be fine as long as you follow the syllabus, notify what's going on, and kind of keep constant communication between myself and you guys. If anything you learn in emergency management, one of the big things is that communication is key, and always erring on the side of excessive communication is even better. So let's talk a little bit about myself. I got into emergency management kind of not in a straightforward path. I went to college in SUNY Albany in Albany, New York. And the first week I was there, I spoke to my freshman roommate, and he said, hey, I'm going to go up to the volunteer fire department and join up there. So I was like, okay, I've never done that. That sounds like fun. So I went with him and I joined. That started me off on a path of about 5 years of being in that fire department, progressing through there, getting to the point of lieutenant, and taking a lot of incident management and emergency management courses kind of in my free time on the side as I kind of grew in my understanding and my interest in emergency management as a larger scale of just more than just first response. So while I did that, I actually changed my major from pre-med to public health. And public health wound up getting me into more of a public health emergency preparedness, which is where I worked for about 8 years through state, local, and federal government. So after college, I went and wound up working for FEMA as a contractor. And at FEMA, I did a lot of medical countermeasures planning. I worked with the city of New York on how to implement medical countermeasures plans at a federal and a local level. And then from there, once that contract was over, I wound up working for the Department of Health doing public health emergency preparedness. This involved a lot of work with healthcare preparedness with the hospital systems, as well as vulnerable populations outreach and response planning when it came to natural disasters. So I did that for about, say, 8 or 9 years altogether. And then I transitioned from the local government to private sector. So currently I work as a product manager working in a small public health tech company where our mission is to increase patient access to pharmaceuticals by working with them to identify different routes and different ways of increasing that kind of patient access, whether it be through copay programs, reducing costs to patients, increasing access and kind of outreach from the companies, all working on that mission to increase patient access. So it's not directly tied with emergency management anymore as much as it used to be, but there are a lot of similarities between product management, which, as I said, I'm a product manager now, and an emergency manager. One of the big things is facilitating communication. So in any bit of development, when it comes to technology or incident response and incident command, communication is always an issue in the after action reports, in the hot washes, and in the, like I said, in the AARs. So this facilitation of communication really set me up very well when it came to product management, which is all facilitating communication between our stakeholders and our development team on what products we're creating, how we're creating them, excuse me, as well as what issue we're solving or problem we're solving for that stakeholder. So over about a 10 to 12 year lifespan, I started from the fire department, went to the state government as an intern in emergency management, then moved over to the federal government working in medical countermeasures planning, and finally then moving to local government doing public health emergency preparedness and response. So what you'll see is a lot of state, local, and federal government kind of influence from my side just based on my experience over the past 10 to 12 years. So a little bit about where I live and kind of my background outside of work. So I've lived in Brooklyn and now Queens, New York for about 7 or 8 years now. One of the big things with Queens is it has over 130 different native languages spoken. And that's the most in the world per capita of a population. So this can make it very difficult for communicating risk because we're trying to do it in over 130 languages. But this is also something we'll talk about in much more detail in week 2. So don't forget about that. Queens also has many locations, many locales in flood zones. Again, something else that we'll talk about in these 7 weeks. And bonus points if you know what flood zone, if you're in one, what flood zone you're in. I'm in flood zone 3, so that can give you a little more of a hint about where I actually live in Queens. What is cool around Queens? A lot. So based on the fact that Queens has the most spoken languages per capita in the world, that also plays into the fact that Queens has that many different nationalities and native and non-native New Yorkers that also live in Queens. What that comes with is all that non-native culture when it comes to food. And I love food. I don't want to call myself a foodie because I don't love that term, but I do love the connotation of it. Many different types of foods, anything I can find is all in Queens, which is great. So if you're trying to find me, you'll probably find me at one of the new restaurants that are always opening in my part of Queens and the surrounding areas. So where I live, like I said, in Queens, has a very heavy Greek presence, and it has been like that for well over 60 years. But over the past 2 decades, has welcomed hundreds of other cultures, leading it to be one of the most culturally and foodie diverse areas in the city. So if you haven't guessed it at this point, I'll give you a second. If you don't know Queens, I live in an area called Astoria. So Astoria is one of the most diverse areas in Queens, but still has a very heavy Greek undertone, which is good for me because I love tzatziki sauce. So, like I said, I love food, and I will frequent many of the new restaurants in the areas on Broadway, 31st Avenue, and Ditmars Boulevard. All of these neighborhoods are very different, but only a few blocks away. And we'll also kind of talk about how living in cities compared to more rural areas is much more of a microcosm of different regions, yet not necessarily geographically set too far apart, but culturally can be very different. And that's kind of something we'll really dive into when we're looking at the different aspects of this course. So, talking about the course, let's go into a little bit about what we're going to be learning over the past 7 or 8 weeks or so. Let me share the syllabus, and we'll kind of go through that because that'll give you the best understanding of what we will be doing. So, you should be able to see my screen at this point. Like I said, my name is Ben Lockspeiser. The course is Economic and Social Trends and Implementing Emergency Management. So let's go through kind of the course description. So this course is designed to provide an overview of economic and social trends and how they impact the ability for a community and government to implement emergency management throughout the 4 phases of emergency management. So in this course, we'll focus on natural disasters mainly that have occurred throughout the world in the more recent time and have had a large economic and social impact on the community at many levels. You'll also see that when we have these disasters, it's often they'll talk about the social impacts, they'll talk about the economic impacts, but very rarely do you see the entire encompassing picture of a natural disaster. And we'll really try hard to kind of delve into that a little more and a little more in depth in this class. So quick expectation, I do expect you to be checking your MCY email at least once a week. If it becomes that you're only checking it once a week, good chance that you can fall behind. There's a lot of work to the course, and to keep up, you do have to be very diligent to get the work done. Don't think of that as a warning. Think of that as just a heads up. Obviously, use me as often as possible and as often as you'd like. There are no required reading materials, that being textbooks for this course, but there are a good amount of chapters I pulled out of other books to, 1, save you money, and 2, give you, I think, a better all-encompassing view of the economic and social trends in implementing emergency management. This will really help you, like I said, not necessarily have to buy an expensive textbook, but give you a good perspective from many different authors. So, some of the objectives of this course. By the end of the course, you'll be able to demonstrate an understanding of the economic and social trends in emergency management and how they can positively and negatively impact implementing emergency management. You're also going to be able to apply critical analysis to principles to current events as they appear in the news, and you'll produce a master's level research paper, which I'll help you out with, based on a recent disaster and how the economic and social trends impacted the implementation of one of the 4 phases of emergency management, whether it be response, recovery, mitigation, or drawing a blank on the last one. We'll go over it in a minute anyway. So when I talk about, and we'll talk about this a little later towards the end of this little video, the research paper will go through in different parts. You'll have pretty much 2 different times to have it reviewed throughout the semester, and the third submission, the final submission, should be a relatively easy, painless submission for you guys to do. So let's talk about the course format a little bit. Every week you'll have a list of reading materials, you'll have discussions, assignments, and quizzes. And as you can see in the assignment strategy, the discussion, assignments, and quizzes are 50% of your grade. So if you don't do any of those, or if you miss a lot of them, you will very quickly fall behind. So you really want to keep up to date with those. It'll also give you a very good understanding based on what other people are posting. So you really want to be mindful about keeping up, reading what other people are posting, reading responses I give back to you and others. It'll give you a much better perspective of this class. And being an online class, think of these discussions as really our back and forth that we would normally have in a classroom setting. So you'll have, like I said, multiple discussion boards and participations each week, 2 to 3 assignments, and at least 1 quiz a week. Again, this is only 7 weeks, so it's a lot to fit into that. And I really want you guys to have a good understanding of all of it. You'll also have a midterm assignment and a final. The midterm will be part of the final, so it'll just help build onto your understanding, your knowledge, and what you produce at the end of this class. I don't think we need at this point to go over standards of academic conduct, student integrity. I think you're all very full of integrity at this point if you're in this program looking to get your master's in emergency management. Grading policy, syllabus changes. If there are any changes in the syllabus, I will be sure to let you know outside of just changing it to the syllabus and reposting it. This is where the meat of the syllabus is, as always. The last page, the class dates and assignment schedule. So like I said, there's 7 weeks in this class, and the way it'll run is, as you can see, you've got the topic for the week, and then you've also got the assignments. So when you're referring to any assignments, refer to them as they're referred to as the syllabus. D1.1 is discussion 1 of 1, right? Discussion 1.2 is discussion week 1, number 2. Assignment week 1, number 1, assignment week 1, number 2, so on and so forth. That way, if you ever have questions on assignments and you want to email me, say we're in week 5, you can say I have a question about D5.2. So I know D5.2 is international emergency management, right? Discussion, assignment, week 5, assignment number 2, or discussion number 2 for that week. So back to the top. Week 1, like I said, going over the introduction, the syllabus review, which we're doing now. We're also going to go over the 4 phases of emergency management and economics in each phase of emergency management. So you'll read and watch all the material. You'll do the 2 discussion assignments, the 3 regular assignments, and 1 quiz about financing disaster recovery. None of this will be new to you once you read and watch all the material. I really try to mix up a good amount of the types of media. So there'll be a lot of reading, there'll be a lot of videos. It's a good way so it's not always the same monotonous reading that you have every week. So week 2, we'll go over Hurricane Michael and also the social trends in emergency management. So what are some of the social issues when we talk about risk and risk communication? Like I mentioned earlier, being from Astoria, New York, we have a lot of different languages spoken. That is a huge hurdle that we have to face when we're looking at risk communication and notifying the public, because we're not worried about the 90% of the population. We're worried about the 10% or the vulnerable population, the edge cases that will be in harm's way or will be in trouble. Because if we have 1 million residents in Queens, the 10% of that is 100,000 people. And that's not an acceptable amount of people to leave at risk when we're working in disaster response and disaster communication. So week 3, we'll go over a case study, and each week is a different case study, if you haven't noticed already. And this is just to further prove our point and kind of like drill in more of the work that we're doing. So week 3's case study is about Hurricane Florence, and then also how Hurricane Michael and Hurricane Florence, how every hurricane impacts communities differently. So we'll kind of go over the different aspects of each hurricane since we did from week 2. And then with week 3 with Hurricane Florence, we'll kind of compare and contrast them, how they are different, how they're the same, and why we can never communicate the same with two hurricanes, because 2 hurricanes are never the same. They always travel in different paths. no matter how similar they may seem. So after week 3, and again, discussion 3 point, D3.1, D3.2, you go through the assignments as well. And then we'll go to week 4. Week 4 is the midterm already, so you're already halfway done with the course. See, this happens really quick, so you're really going to have to stay up to date with your work. Week 4 case study is the Mendocino Complex wildfires, some of the largest wildfires in California and the United States history. So this will look at those wildfires, so looking at a little different than hurricanes this week, looking at disaster evacuations when it comes to pets and animals, and animal evacuation planning. This will also be your midterm research paper outline, which is due. So we'll talk about the outline, we'll talk about the midterm and the final at the end of the class, but at the end of week 4 is when the midterm will be due. So mark that in your calendars now. Week 5, we talk about Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Maria. So again, we're looking at 2 different disasters, similar, but at this time we're looking at international disaster coordination and response. So how disasters impacting multiple countries can cause more issues when it comes to international response. Who are some of the players in international response compared to a local, state, or federal disaster, and how they can work together to coordinate response in that disaster. Week 6, we'll look at the Sulawesi, Indonesia earthquake. And this week, we'll kind of talk about infrastructure and how infrastructure can be so positive or so negative when it comes to how it's built in communities. This will also be part 1 of your final, which is the draft research paper that'll be due at the end of week 6. Like I said, we'll talk about that in a minute or two. And then week 7 finally is the closeout and the final research paper that's due. So let's talk about the midterm, final, and the draft research paper. The final output that you'll have will be a research paper on a natural disaster that's occurred, let's say, in the past 5 or 10 years. We don't want to go too far back because we want to stay current with technology and also kind of like the cycle of news and everything, so we can have similar information. So you're going to do a research paper on that. You're going to choose a disaster, and the research paper will be based on some of the positive and negatives, kind of like an after-action report, but it'll really be analyzing that after-action report for what can be done better, what was done well, and how we can make changes in the future with mitigation in some aspects to kind of build that up and kind of build on what was already produced. So that's me. That's where I live. That's my background. That's the 7 weeks of the course. One of your first assignments will be to tell me about yourself. I want you to introduce yourself, and I look forward to hearing from you all. And if you have any questions, concerns, I think we'll have a very good dialogue going back and forth over these 7 weeks, and hopefully past that as well. I like to keep in touch with my students and kind of know what's going on and how they're doing, so feel free to reach out at any time. Look forward to speaking to you. Take care.